At YCS Indianapolis, I got the chance to watch Exodia win an incredible feature match, but afterwards I couldn't help but wonder why alternate win conditions had historically been so unpopular. At the moment, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has almost 20 cards with automatic victory effects, but only a couple have ever seen use at tournaments. Today I'm covering every single one of them in chronological order to find out why nobody plays most instant win cards. Of course, we're going to start with Exodia the Forbidden One, released in The Legend of Blue Eyes White Dragon all the way back in March 2002. This was the original alternate win condition card. To win with Exodia, you have to have it as well as the 4 limbs of Exodia, 4 vanilla monsters, all in your hand at the exact same time. Of course, this was designed to be flashy and inconsistent. It's a big anime card, and that's part of the fun of playing it. It's supposed to be a challenge assembling all 5 pieces of Exodia, and it's important to remember that. Exodia decks usually fall into one of 2 categories. People either build an Exodia deck that stalls out the opponent for a lot of turns until they draw the pieces, or they play a combo variant that tries to get to Exodia on turn 1 by either drawing a million cards or Treasure Panda. The biggest thing holding Exodia back is unfortunately the only real requirement for its effect. The Exodia pieces don't really do anything until you get all of them in your hand at the same time. When Mystic Mine was legal, you did see some Exodia Mystic Mine decks at regionals every once in a while, but realistically, even in those decks, Final Countdown was usually the better option. Outside of that recent Jeff Leonard feature match, which was great to see, the last time that I can really remember a lot of people talking about Exodia as a competitive deck at least was way back in 2012 when Jarrell Winston took Exodia to the World Championship and impressively managed to make it all the way to top 8. Other than that top 8 and a few cool feature matches throughout the years though, Exodia has failed to make any sort of big impact at competitive events. If it gets more support in the future, then it might be better off, but until that happens, it's in a difficult spot. Just a few months later, we got Destiny Board in Labyrinth of Nightmare. When this card and all 4 spirit message cards with different names are placed on your field, you win the duel. Once per turn during your opponent's end phase, place 1 spirit message card from your hand or deck in your spell and trap card zone face up in the proper order. When any spirit message card or Destiny Board you control leaves the field, send all spirit message cards and Destiny Board you control to the graveyard. Destiny Board has a number of issues. Like Exodia, it requires you to play 4 bricks in your deck, the 4 spirit messages, but unlike Exodia, where you keep all of the cards in your hand, which is generally safe from the opponent, Destiny Board requires you to put all of the spirit messages on the field over the course of several turns, making them a lot more vulnerable to removal. And that's not even mentioning the huge downside that Destiny Board has, where if any spirit message or Destiny Board you control leaves the field, the rest of the cards go with it. Years later, they printed some pretty helpful Destiny Board support, but despite that, the deck was never able to take off even as a rogue strategy. Destiny Board is a fun card to play against your friends, but not really good at tournaments. Next up, we have Last Turn, released in 2003. This card has weird text and weird rulings surrounding it, so let's read through it and see what it does. It says, this card can only be activated during your opponent's turn when your life points are 1,000 or less. Select 1 monster on your side of the field and send all other cards on the field and in their respective owner's hands to their respective graveyards. After that, your opponent selects and special summons 1 monster from their deck in face-up attack position and attacks your selected monster. Any battle damage from this battle is treated as 0. The player whose monster remains alone on the field at the end phase of this turn wins the duel. Any other case results in a draw. Conceptually, I understand what they were going for with Last Turn's effect. If you're down in life points, you can set up this big final fight, but one of the issues that came up here was that if you activated Last Turn and targeted a card like Jowgen the Spiritualist, your opponent wouldn't be allowed to special summon a monster, therefore you always won the duel. Now, some modern players might be wondering how you're even allowed to activate Last Turn when Jowgen is on the board, because how are you able to use a card that forces the opponent to special summon if you have a card on the field that restricts special summoning? Last Turn has a ton, and I do mean a ton, of weird rulings, and one of those weird rulings is that for whatever reason back in the day, they decided that half of the effects on this card happen after resolution. So it's not like you activate Last Turn, do all of those steps, and then the Last Turn resolves and decides the winner of the duel. Instead, you activate the Last Turn, target your monster, and then send everything on the field and the hands to the graveyard except that monster. Last Turn is resolved now, and now it has placed all these conditions that you have to check throughout the turn. Your opponent will then special summon a monster after the card resolves. You'll have this special battle phase where the monsters battle after the card resolves, and then in the end phase, you will check who won that battle. It is a very strange card with a bunch of weird ass rulings, and while all of of that might sound way too overcomplicated, and it is because it's last turn. The main thing here is that you are allowed to activate it while you control Jowgen, which essentially sets you up for an instant win. Last turn is still banned to this day in the TCG, so it's a little unfair to say that nobody plays it. I'm not 100% sure that this would be a popular card in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! If they unbanned it, but that's mostly because if the card ever did come back, it would pretty much require getting an errata. 2003 must have been the year for alternate win conditions, because in December we got Final Countdown in Dark Crisis. This is a normal spell card that says, pay 2,000 life points. After 20 turns have passed, you win the duel. On one hand, this is easily the slowest alternate win condition card that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has ever printed, but on the other hand, it's also guaranteed and it requires no setup. As long as you draw the card, you can simply activate it immediately, and then the only requirement for winning the game is surviving those 20 turns. Unlike most of the cards in today's video though, Final Countdown at least has multiple YCS tops, which is pretty impressive. At 2012's YCS Philly, a Final Countdown deck managed to get all the way to top 16, but then years later, Final Countdown found its way in competition once again in a lot of Mystic Mine decks. Mystic Mine was a deck that oftentimes would use burn cards to win the game, but some players found it just easier to activate Final Countdown and wait 20 turns. While the Mystic Mine was on the board, if you controlled no monsters, your opponent would basically never be able to attack or activate any monster effects. Back in the day, Final Countdown decks were primarily comprised of cards that stopped your opponent from attacking, but with Mystic Mine in the format, that basically was all the defense you needed, so Final Countdown was a pretty good pair. Next up, in January of 2007, we got Victory Dragon as a Shonen Jump subscription promotional card. This card cannot be special summoned. To tribute summon this card, you must tribute 3 dragon type monsters. If this card attacks your opponent directly and reduces their life points to 0, you win the match. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I first read this card way back in the day, I did not understand it. I was like, what do you mean you win the match? You are already winning the match. You're attacking directly for game. But what I didn't understand at the time was that Victory Dragon is not a duel winner, it is a match winner, the best 2 out of 3 that you play at tournaments. So, for example, if you're in game 1 of a match against your opponent at a tournament, if you win with a Victory Dragon direct attack, you will win the entire match. You don't have to play games 2 or 3. The only other cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! That have this effect are World Championship prize cards, but those ones aren't legal for play. So Victory Dragon was the first and only time that players were allowed to play a match winner in tournaments. But even Victory Dragon was only legal for 2 months before they banned it, and it wasn't really because the card was good, it was surprisingly because it caused a bunch of arguments. In Yu-Gi-Oh! Like a lot of card games, you're allowed to concede whenever you want to. You don't have to wait for your life points to hit 0. And that means if your opponent summons a Victory Dragon and is ready to attack you directly, you can actually scoop up right there and go to the next game without your opponent connecting the direct attack. I even heard that some locals implemented a rule where if a player summoned a Victory Dragon, the other player wasn't allowed to concede. That being said, even if you weren't allowed to concede whenever you wanted to, I'm not sure if Victory Dragon would actually be played. Though people did experiment with the card in those 2 months that it was legal, it wasn't really a competitive mainstay. I think it's more so banned nowadays because it's a hassle. In Tactical Evolution, we got Venamanaga, the deity of poisonous snakes. This card cannot be normal summoned or set, and it must be special summoned either with Rise of the Snake Deity or by its own effect. Gains 500 attack for each reptile monster in your graveyard. Neither player can target this card with card effects. Also, it is unaffected by other cards and their effects. When this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can banish 1 other reptile monster from your graveyard, special summon this card. When this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, place 1 Hyper Venom counter on it. When the 3rd Hyper Venom counter is placed on this card, you win the duel. I have very few problems with Venamanaga as a monster. I think that this thing was way ahead of its time if we consider that it was released in 2007. I mean, cards back then did not have these types of protection effects. Not to mention, if your opponent does manage to get rid of this thing in battle, it can just bring itself back immediately. The biggest reason that people don't play Venamanaga is that summoning requirement, Rise of the Snake Deity. This is a trap card that says when a face-up Phenomenon, the king of poisonous snakes you control, is destroyed except by battle, special summon 1 Venamanaga from your hand or deck. Now, the thing about Phenomenon is that it's just a monster. The king does not have a built-in summon effect, so you will have to find a way to get it on the board. But then after that, you have to get to Rise of the Snake Deity, a mostly unsearchable normal trap card, and then on top of that, you have to find a way to destroy the Phenomenon, because while your opponent might do that for you, chances are they're probably not. That means to summon Venamanaga, you have to have King, Rise, and a card to destroy the king, and your opponent has to not interrupt any of those things. Less than a year later, we got Exodius the Ultimate Forbidden Lord as a Shonen Jump promotional card. Exodius cannot be normal summoned or set. It must be special summoned from your hand by shuffling all monsters in your graveyard into the deck, and it cannot be special summoned by other ways. When this card declares an attack, send one monster from your hand or deck to the graveyard. This card gains 1000 attack for each normal monster in your graveyard. If this face-up card would leave the field, banish it instead. If there are 5 different Forbidden One cards in your graveyard that were sent there by this card's effect, you win the duel. I find it interesting that Exodius was printed less than 1 year after Vinamanaga because they do share a few similarities. They're big 0 attack monsters that gain attack based on monsters in the graveyard, and they win the duel by attacking the opponent. But there are a few key differences that I think are worth mentioning. With Vinamanaga, the big downside is that it's hard to summon, but at least it has protection effects on the field. Exodius is the exact opposite. It is very easy to summon, you only have to have 1 monster in your graveyard, but it has no protection effects on the field, and if you are trying to win with its effect, you have to attack 5 times compared to Vinamanaga's 3. Funnily enough though, Exodius has seen success at tournaments over the years in a variety of decks. Not because of the win condition effect though, simply because it is a free special summonable level 10 monster. And the shuffling back the graveyard was helpful for a few combo decks that wanted to reset their extra decks. So even though Exodius has technically seen play at tournaments over the years, it never was for the instant win ability. After that, we went 5 years without getting another alternate win condition card, but in 2013 we got number 88 Gimmick Puppet of Leo. This Xyz monster takes 3 level 8s to summon, and it says once per turn, if you have no cards in your spell and trap card zone, you can detach 1 Xyz material from this card, and if you do, place 1 destiny counter on it. You cannot conduct your battle phase the turn you activate this effect. When 3 destiny counters are on this card, you win the duel. To me at least, Gimmick Puppet of Leo's effect kinda reads like a joke with 3 punchlines. First off, why does this card require 3 monsters to bring out? I know the Gimmick Puppet archetype can flood the board with level 8 monsters, but the problem is this card has to compete with every 2 material rank 8 in the entire game, and many of those are better than this. A couple of them are even part of the Gimmick Puppet archetype. Second, this card requires you to have no cards in your spell and trap card zone each time you use its effect. It is true that Gimmick Puppets don't really have a lot of back row cards, so I guess the restriction isn't really supposed to matter, but if you are playing a card like this that needs to stay on the board for 3 turns and it has no protection, you might want to have some spell and trap cards to keep it around. The final punchline is that this card restricts you from entering the battle phase if you use its effect that turn, and that really is funny to me because Gimmick Puppets are all about OTKing and doing a ton of damage in 1 turn. Simply put, Gimmick Puppet of Leo feels out of place in its own archetype. And wouldn't you know it, just 1 year later they released number Chaos 88 Gimmick Puppet Disaster Leo. Let's see if this one improves upon the original. Disaster Leo must be special summoned with a rank up magic spell targeting number 88 Gimmick Puppet of Leo. Neither player can target this card on the field with card effects. Once per turn, you could attach 1 material from this card, inflict 1000 damage to your opponent. During your end phase, if your opponent's life points are 2000 or less and this card has no materials, you win the duel. Compared to the original Gimmick Puppet of Leo, Disaster Leo certainly looks better, but that's not to say that it's actually a good card. It can't be targeted, which is nice, and it does have an ability that does damage to the opponent, so maybe you can close out the game. But what I find the strangest about this card is just that it has an instant win effect. With just this 1 card, you can deal over half of their life points in damage, so I just don't understand why this card needs to also win the duel. I've seen a few crazy combos online combining this card alongside Revolt to actually use its effect, but in any sort of tournament setting, that's not going to work. Next up, we have a Relay Soul, released in Dragons of Legend back in 2014. Relay Soul is technically an alternative win condition for the opponent, but I still wanted to include it. Special summon 1 monster from your hand. While it is face up on your field, you take no damage. When it leaves the field though, your opponent wins the duel. Relay Soul is really not supposed to be a serious card. It is taken from the anime and it should be viewed as such. One fun fact though, if you are required to play this card because you lost a bet against your buddies the night before locals, is that if you use a monster as Xyz material, your opponent will not win the duel. That does not count as leaving the field. So there's that, I guess. In 2014's Primal Origin, we got Jackpot 7, a normal spell card with a pretty unique alternate win condition requirement. When Jackpot 7 is activated, you shuffle it back into the deck. When this card in your possession is sent to your graveyard by an opponent's card effect, banish this card. If 3 of your Jackpot 7 are currently banished and were banished by this effect, you win the duel. Notably, when this card says your possession, it is referring to when it is in your hand, on your side of the field, or in your deck. One of the ways that people have tried to win with Jackpot 7 over the years is by giving their opponent a card like Morphine Jar or Needleworm, and then they'll combine cards like Book of Moon and AD Changer to repeatedly trigger the Morphine Jar or Needleworm effects to eventually mill themselves out of the Jackpot 7s and win the duel. Another common way that people try to win with Jackpot 7 is by giving their opponent a copy of Dark Scorpion Burglars. Once you've done that, you can activate a card like Super Hippo Carnival, crash a couple tokens into the Burglars, and mill those 3 Jackpot 7s. These combos might sound a bit gimmicky, and that's because they are. Jackpot 7 has unfortunately never been a competitive card because, as you can kind of tell, the combos required to get it to work are a bit overcomplicated. From World Superstars in 2015, we have Ghostrick Angel of Mischief. Angel of Mischief is a generic rank 4 monster, but it can also be Xyz summoned by using a Ghostrick Xyz monster you control as material. When you do that, all the Xyz materials are then transferred to the Angel of Mischief, which is pretty important because when the number of Xyz materials on this card becomes 10, you win the duel. This card also has 2 once per turn effects. The first one allows you to add a Ghost Explorer trap card from your deck to your hand by detaching a material, and the other one allows you to attach a Ghostrick card from your hand to the Angel of Mischief as material. The Ghostrick archetype has always been about stalling in some way. You have multiple field spells that prevent the opponent from attacking, you have cards that can flip monsters face down on the opponent's side of the field, so the idea here is that the Ghostrick Angel of Mischief is protected over the course of several turns, and then you can attach all the material to it. Notably, there aren't really Ghostrick main deck monsters that have effects that can attach themselves to this card. You're basically stuck with only having the Angel of Mischief effect and Ghostrick Shot's Graveyard effect to attach materials to this. A lot of players have tried to look outside the Ghostrick archetype for ways to make this card work. There are other cards out there that can put materials on it, but in reality, this card is primarily used for one combo, and that is to get to Utopic Draco Future, and it's really good at that, but you don't see it too many other places. 2017's Maximum Crisis was a very influential set, introducing both the True Dracos and Ash Blossom to the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG. Maximum Crisis also gave us a lot of the Phantasm Spiral cards. You might have seen these before. They have a field spell that summons tokens, and they have a lot of trap cards, but they even have an alternate win condition card, Phantasm Spiral Assault. Let's take a look at what it does. Target one Phantasm Spiral Dragon you control. When it destroys 3 effect monsters your opponent controls by battle while equipped with 3 or more Phantasm Spiral equip spells with different names, you win the duel. For context, Phantasm Spiral Dragon is a vanilla monster with 2,900 attack points, and the Phantasm Spiral archetype only has 3 different equip spells. Furthermore, the equip spells are not that good, and none of them have protection effects besides from battle, which isn't ideal. Phantasm Spiral Assault is an unnecessary alternative win condition and an otherwise pretty alright rogue strategy. 2018's Flames of Destruction brought us FA Winners, a continuous spell card that says, if you control an FA monster, this card cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. When your FA monster, whose level is at least 5 or higher than its original level, battles an opponent's monster and inflicts battle damage to them, you can banish 1 card from your hand, field, or graveyard. You can only activate this effect once per turn. If 3 of your FA field spells with different names are currently banished and were all banished by the effect of FA Winners, you win the duel. I like looking at FA Winners right after talking about Phantasm Spiral Assault because they're both kind of similar in that they require 3 attacks to win. But I will say that it's much easier to get an FA monster that meets these requirements than equipping a Phantasm Spiral Dragon with 3 equip spells. And I like that this card does have some sort of protection on the field. It's not the best protection, but hey, it stops MST. The main reason people don't play this card, besides the fact that FAs aren't that popular, is that in the FA deck, you just don't really need this type of effect. You already have combos, you already have setup you're trying to get to. There's no reason to also add an alternate win condition on top of that. FA Winners, unfortunately, doesn't really have any other effects that make it worth running, so for most FA players, this is not one that makes the cut. From Battles of Legend Relentless Revenge, we got Flying Elephant. Let's take a look at what it does. Once per opponent's turn, if this card would be destroyed by their card effect, it is not destroyed. Once per turn, during their end phase, if that effect was applied this turn, apply the following effect. During your next turn, if this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent by a direct attack, you win the duel. Flying Elephant's effect is kind of like a combination of Venomanaga and Jackpot 7's worst parts, and that's being nice. Flying Elephant wants your opponent to try and destroy it 1 time and 1 time only, and then it needs to survive until the end phase with no other protection effects. And then on the opponent's turn, you have to find a way to sneak in a direct attack with this thing. It's not that it's impossible to win with Flying Elephant, but it's more work than most players players are willing to give. Next up, released in 2019's Gold Sarcophagus tin, we have Exodia the Legendary Defender. Cannot be special summoned. You can tribute 5 monsters to tribute summon this card. This card's attack and defense become the combined original attack and defense of the tributed monsters. If this card summoned this way destroys a Dark Fiend monster owned by your opponent, you win the duel at the end of the damage step. Besides the attack and defense boost, all of the other effects on this card are terrible. If this card required 5 tributes to special summon it, it would still be bad, but as it stands right now as a tribute summon, it's borderline unplayable. But that's not all this card is asking you to do, because even once you get it on the board, you then have to destroy a Dark Fiend monster owned by your opponent in battle. The one nice thing that I can say about this card is that the artwork is really cool. It is hand-drawn by Kazuki Takahashi, so of course it's gonna look great. I just wish the artwork was attached to a slightly better monster card. Next up, from Maximum Gold Eldorado, we have number IC1000 Numeronius Numeronia. We'll talk about some ways to summon this card in a few moments, but for now, let's take a look at the effects. If this card is special summoned by the effect of number C1000 Numeronius, it gains 100,000 attack and defense during your opponent's turn only. Also, apply the following effects from the start of the next turn after this card was special summoned. Monsters your opponent controls must attack this card if able. At the start of your opponent's turn, if this card did not battle, you win the duel. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can detach 1 material from this card, negate the attack, and if you do, gain life points equal to that monster's attack. There's obviously a lot of text on this card, but the effect basically boils down to either your opponent attacks into a huge monster and loses the duel on life points, or they don't attack because you blocked them and then you win the duel automatically. This effect mentions Chaos 1000 Numeronius as the main way to summon it. If this monster is destroyed by an opponent's card effect while it has material and sent to the graveyard, you get to special summon the number IC1000 Numeronius Numeronia and then attach it to that as material. And while you could overlay 5 level 12 monsters to summon number Chaos 1000, the more conventional way is with the Numeron Chaos Ritual. Chaos Ritual does require a bit of setup. You can only use it if number C1 was destroyed by an opponent's monster effect this turn, but then at least you don't have to worry about summoning 5 level 12 monsters. While I can't say that I recommend playing Numeronus Numeronia in your Numeron Network deck, I will say that you don't have to adjust your deck list that much to include this combo in your already built Numeron deck, so people are definitely trying this card on Master Duel especially, but it's not the most common pick in the Numeron decks. And finally, we have Musical Sumo Dice Games from 2022's Dimension Force, and this is the most recent alternative win condition card printed in the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG. At the start of your opponent's battle phase, if this card is in the main monster zone, roll a 6-sided die. Move this card directly to that many main monster zones clockwise, and if a monster is already in that zone it moves to, attach that monster to this card as material and transfer its materials to this card. If this effect causes this monster's number of materials to exceed 6, you win the duel. If this card cannot be moved or the monster in the zone it moves to cannot be attached, send this card to the graveyard. This effect might seem complicated at first glance, but essentially it is just rotating around the board, collecting monsters as material, and then whichever player activates the effect that gets it to exceed 6 material, that person wins the duel. I think it's pretty clear that this card was never designed to be played at tournaments. It's just a fun, casual, alternate win condition card, and while it's great for that, as well as YouTube duel replay videos, it's not really used anywhere else. Even though this video is only about the TCG format, because that's what I play, I wanted to mention 3 cards that currently are only in the OCG that are alternate win conditions. Of course, you have the Creator of Light. This was released all the way back in 2011, and it contributes all 3 of the Egyptian God cards to summon itself, and then when you summon it, it wins the duel. Pretty cool, but not practical for obvious reasons. Creator of Miracles was released during the Zexal era, and it has a pretty unique effect. You shout out loud Zexal Field and then target a number Chaos 39 monster you control. That monster gets to attack directly that turn, and then if you've used a couple other specific cards previously in the duel, if the Chaos 39 inflicts battle damage to the opponent during that direct attack, you win the duel. Unsurprisingly, this card's weird activation condition prevented it from being successful. And then finally, in 2019, they got True Exodia. If the only monsters on the field are this card you control and the 4 Forbidden One normal monsters, then your opponent wins the duel. Yes, that is true. If you go through all of that work, you get to force the opponent to win with Exodia. Anyway, that is all for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. The next discussion video will not take as long to post, I promise. I'll see you later though. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.